In California, Mr. and Mrs. Livingston have a baby and learn he's been born with no impunity at all. This means indeed the weakest origin can kill him, he'll have to live in insulation, and everything he touches must be decontaminated first. To keep him safe, Jimmy is put inside a plastic bubble where he'll have to live the rest of his life. This health issue makes Mrs. Livingston overprotective of her son, and she doesn't indeed take him home until he turns 4 when other kiddies try to meet him. She bursts their balloon to scarify them down. She says the world out there's unprintable and that he'll no way have to leave the house again. The Livingstons have prepared the place for him. Jimmy's room is a big bubble so he can walk freely outside. There's a decontamination door so he can admit food and toys, and there are 2 dyads of retractable arms so the parents can still be tender with their son. Mrs. Livingston takes good care of him and reads to him every night, but she also keeps him veritably retired. He's only allowed to read magazines and watch television that have sanitized content authorized by a religious mama. Mrs. Livingston also homeschools Jimmy with propaganda so he can be an extreme chauvinist like her. Whenever the neighborhood kiddies come to the frontal field covered in bubble syrupy to make fun of him, Mrs. Livingston scares them down with cold water. Jimmy is only fed his mama's manual food, which slightly tastes like anything because she disapproves of fat and sugar too. She also complains when Mr. Livingston gets Jimmy a bike, allowing it could kill him. By the time Jimmy turns 16, he's blessed an electric guitar rather of a auto like the other teens. One day Jimmy is looking through the window and sees the new neighbors moving in. They have a son called Chloe and Jimmy incontinently falls in love with her. Mrs. Livingston isn't happy about this and would laterally affront Chloe by reading Jimmy stories about boys that die for touching mischievous neighbors. Since also, Jimmy pretends to wash the window every day just to look at her. This helps him reach puberty and he starts to wake up with wood in his pants. The first time he gets spooked and hits it with a club, so his mama has to calm him down and teaches him to repeat the Pledge of Constancy until it goes down. Meanwhile, Chloe hangs out with musketeers from Academy who mock Jimmy and repeat ridiculous rumors about his situation. She scolds them for it and decides to eventually introduce herself. Mr. Livingston opens the door without a care and Chloe follows the tube system to Jimmy's room, where he finds him falling out of the decontamination door. Jimmy gets nervous when he sees her body up close and calls her the bad word her mama uses, not knowing its real meaning. Chloe plays along and asks about his guitar, promising to come back hereafter for another visit. The coming Jimmy teaches her how to play guitar using the glove hands on the bubble and recites the pledge every time his body gets too interested. Since also, Chloe starts visiting Jimmy frequently and they've lots of fun together. Mrs. Livingston does not authorize, but she not find a good reason to stop them. On Jimmy's birthday, Chloe gives him a guinea gourmandizer inside its own bubble, and for Halloween she brings a bunch of kitties and delicacies so Jimmy can know what the vacation is truly like. The night of Chloe's birthday, she sneaks into Jimmy's room while drunk, saying she wants a birthday kiss. She tries to enter the bubble, but she passes out in the decontamination chamber. On Chloe's hop night, she shows Jimmy her awful dress and he takes filmland. Still, he's devastated to see her leave with her swain Mark, who damages the bubble with his cigarette. Many nights latterly, Jimmy looks through the window and discovers Mark and Chloe kissing, which breaks his heart. The coming day, Mrs. Livingston reminds him that all women will leave him someday. Eventually, latterly, Chloe comes to see Jimmy with big news. Mark has asked her to marry him, and the form will be this weekend at Niagara Falls. Chloe wants to give Jimmy one last gift before leaving, and puts it in the decontamination door, but Jimmy is hurt and ignores the box. Rather, he gives her the guinea gourmandizer back and tells her to leave. Chloe leaves in gashes, egging Jimmy to eventually open the gift. To his shock, he finds a manual snow globe with the words, "I love you." Jimmy screams in excitement and eventually decides to take control of his life. He designs and builds a lower interpretation of the bubble that would allow him to leave home. This way he can stop the marriage. While his parents are sleeping, Jimmy tries to sneak out but falls and rolls downward. The noise wakes Mr. Livingston up, but he stays in bed, quietly encouraging his son. Once outdoors, Jimmy is agitated over everything: canine poop, the sun, and the fact he can run. Ultimately, he reaches the machine station and tries to buy a ticket, but he doesn't have enough plutocrat for it. While trying to suppose of a new plan, he crosses the road and is hit by a machine. Luckily, his bubble saves him. The people in the machine incontinently come to check on him, and when they hear of his thing, they agree to take him to Niagara Falls and pick him up to get him in the machine. At home, Mrs. Livingston discovers that Jimmy is gone and screams in fear. She tries calling the police, but they do and take her seriously. so she makes her hubby make a fake kidnap note. Still, he signs it with the Jews, so it isn't taken seriously. Moreover, the couple decides to go looking for Jimmy themselves, and they stop at the machine station, where the clerk tells them about the Niagara Falls plan. Back to the machine, Jimmy notices the group's uniforms, the lyrics of their songs, how they partake the same name, and the effects their strange book promotes. This makes him realize they're a cult, but calling them that gets the group angry and they protest him out of the machine. Now he's alone in the middle of the desert and he has to run down from arbitrary creatures. Ultimately, he comes across a biker named Slim, who threatens him with his cutter. Jimmy explains he can help him fix his bike. Slim is so thankful that when he hears about Jimmy's thing, he agrees to give him a lift. He also tells him he used to be in love with a woman named Wildlife, who left him for another man. To this day, Slim wants to find that Joe and kill him. Meanwhile, the cult eventually reunites with their leader, who reveals the big vaticination painted on a gemstone. The chosen one will come with the holy word inside a living globe. The followers assume that's Jimmy, so they get back on the road to find him. That night, Jimmy and Slim make it to Las Vegas and Jimmy is fascinated by all the lodestones. He attends his first musicale and the crowd tosses him around like a ball. While Slim teaches him how to go at the summer house, he also tells him what being with a woman is like. When Jimmy sees that there's a scooter as a prize, he gambles until he wins it and leaves without Slim because he only has 2 days left. Soon the Livingstons and the cult make it to Las Vegas too. As soon as Slim sees the cult members, he remembers they left Jimmy in the desert and threatens to kill them. In return, the cult machine runs over his bike. Many hours laterally, the Livingstons reach the road and see Jimmy on the scooter. Mrs. Livingston forces her hubby to turn the auto and block the way, accidentally hitting the scooter in the process. Jimmy flies out and his bubble makes him bounce off for a while until he lands inside a train. He screams when he sees the people outside and learns that they're part of a freak show handled by Dr. Freak, who owns these people like slaves. Suddenly, the train stops and Jimmy bounces out, chancing Dr. Freak staying. Jimmy laughs at his size and Croaker Freak starts furiously breaking a auto's windows as a trouble. Still, when he hears that Jimmy is the bubble boy, he thinks he could be part of his show. When Jimmy says no, Freak jumps on the bubble and tells him that no woman would ever love a codger. An offended Jimmy pushes him off and the bouncing sends Freak flying, causing his small body to hit a huge truck. Also, Jimmy gets ready to leave and the other freaks try to follow him, so he explains to them they're now free and they can do whatever they want, but he must finish his charge alone. Next, Jimmy takes a handcar to advance through the train tracks, but it's too slow, so he stops at a restaurant to ask for help. He finds a sheriff and a bunch of rednecks mocking a man called Push Pop, and Jimmy comes to his defense. The men start mocking him rather, but when they hear he's got not impunity, they suppose it's some complaint and everyone starts running down, leaving Jimmy outside. When they slam the door, a beacon falls and starts a fire in the eatery. Jimmy panics as he tries to find an exit. Thankfully, Push Pop appears on the back door and takes Jimmy down in his ice, cream, and curry truck. His driving is crazy and Jimmy nearly falls, but at least they get down before the eatery explodes. Meanwhile, the Livingstons reach the train and ask Freak about Jimmy. Mrs. Livingston treats Freak like a baby, offering to pay the information with delicacy. In the end, Mrs. Livingston calls Chloe and tells her to stay down from her son, affronting her without vacillation. While they're distracted, the other freaks steal the Livingston's auto. Since Freak wants his group back, he steals a truck and agrees to leave with the couple. Back to Jimmy, he shares his thing with Push Pop, who agrees to take him to Niagara Falls. Jimmy falls asleep during the trip and has a weird dream about Chloe being attacked by dinosaurs. He tries to save her, but the dinosaurs master him and Mark saves Chloe rather. Jimmy wakes up screaming and startles Push Pop, causing him to accidentally hit a cow in the middle of the road. This greatly dislocates him because cows are sacred in his religion, but Jimmy quotes his mama saying all other persuasions are falsehoods. Offended, Push Pop tells Jimmy to go down, while he stays to do a ritual for the cow's death. Jimmy gets going while tasting ice cream for the first time. Minutes laterally, a truck drives by and crushes the cow indeed more. Soon Slim also appears with a whole gang of bikers and they ask Push Pop about the cult. While staying, they've Push Pop's ice cream and watch in surprise how the cult machine shows up to motorists over their bikes. Luckily, Push Pop agrees to give the gang a lift. Meanwhile, Chloe is trying on her marriage dress, but she's having dubieties because she can't stop allowing about Jimmy. In the evening, Jimmy manages to reach a city and asks Pappy for a lift, but he must pay 500 bones. Obviously he doesn't have that plutocrat, but he sees a sign advertising a cash prize and enters the structure. It turns out to be a mischievous club, where he agrees to fight in the slush with two gorgeous women. Because of the bubble, the women keep slipping off and can't hurt him. So Jimmy fluently wins the fight while he keeps reciting the pledge. With the plutocrat in hand, Jimmy comes out to look for Pappy, only to find the cult machine rather. The zealots incontinently abduct him, which is seen by the freaks that just arrived. Jimmy is taken to the ritual spot, where the zealots get red to free him from his bubble. While everyone prays, the freaks steal some uniforms and try to save Jimmy, but when the zealots see them they suppose the ritual failed and everyone is shifting. Everyone panics and the freaks use the distraction to move Jimmy down, only to find the way blocked by Slim and the gang. A crazy fight ensues among the bikers, the freaks, and the zealots, during which Jimmy runs to pay Pappy so they can eventually drive off. While everyone runs back to their vehicles to continue the chase, Jimmy falls asleep in the auto. The coming morning, he's shocked to discover Pappy failed while still driving. The auto loses control and an unforeseen turn sends Jimmy flying right through a sign by the road. The auto continues without him, so Jimmy decides to enter a grocery store to call Chloe. Unfortunately, Mark picks up and tells Jimmy to give up because they're getting married in an hour. Losing all stopgap, Jimmy calls his mama to ask her to pick him up. An agitated Mrs. Livingston throws Freak out of the auto because she does not need him presently. While staying, a crying Jimmy tells the girl at the counter if he can have a beer for free and the girl agrees. Jimmy cannot tell she is not the real clerk, she's a purloiner, who is keeping the factual hand hidden outside the counter. As soon as Jimmy takes his first belt of beer he passes out. Ultimately his parents find him and get him in the auto, but before leaving Mrs. Livingston must go to the restroom. Jimmy and his dad use this time alone to finally bond, and it's clear that Mr. Livingston is jealous that Jimmy got to have fun. He uses a moon conceit to tell his son to no way give up, and Jimmy runs down. Mrs. Livingston freaks out when she notices and makes her hubby chase after their son. Soon the other three groups show up as well, screaming at each other over Jimmy. The chase takes them to an field, where an airplane is about to take off. Jimmy climbs on it and gets to escape just in time, laughing when he sees the airman is Pappy's binary family Pippi. The unforeseen take-off causes the four vehicles to crash against each other and Slim is shocked to see that Mrs. Livingston is Heisek's girlfriend Campfire. Moments laterally the airplane makes it to Niagara Falls at the same time the marriage form is starting. The airplane starts conking so Pippi has to pull off a crazy move to avoid crashing. Still it causes Jimmy to fall off and land in the water. Flashing back everything Slim tutored him, Jimmy lets the cascade guides his way as he floats in his bubble. In the church, Mark says, "I do," but Chloe hesitates. At that moment Jimmy bursts in and shocks Chloe by coming out of his bubble, saying he'd rather have a nanosecond with her than a whole life alone. Also he kisses Chloe and tells her he loves her before collapsing. Chloe thinks he's dead as the Livingstons arrive with all the other groups. Mrs. Livingston cries for her dead son, but her hubby is done and forces her to confess the verity Jimmy isn't sick presently. He got better when he turned 4, that's why they took him home from the sanitarium that time. Mrs. Livingston has been lying to him to keep him in the house ever. Jimmy wakes up and is so happy to have a chance at life that he forgive his mama. Also he eventually gets together with Chloe. Eventually laterally Jimmy and Chloe get wedded and all the musketeers Jimmy made during his adventure attend. Pushpop has brought the cutlet and a cow. He also reveals the zealots are now following his beliefs. Slim has befriended the Livingstons and they're in a poly relationship. When the happy couple gets ready to leave, they discover their drivers are the old twins, who have found the woman they used to fight over. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.